Before we get into this video, I have to give a spoiler warning. This video contains spoilers for Shadowkeep, associated lore, and more importantly, information revealed in the Lightfall vidoc. If you want to go into Lightfall completely unspoiled, this video is probably not for you. However, this video isn't based on leaks or any other unofficial information. Everything in the video either comes from gameplay, lore books, and Lightfall's marketing materials. I'm simply going to read a lore book that was released back in Shadowkeep and explain its greater context, what it tells us about the Witness, its goals, and the final shape so that we can better understand the Witness when they take center stage in Lightfall. In my opinion, the most important lore book in all of Destiny is called Unveiling. It's a parable explained by the darkness inside the lunar pyramid in Shadowkeep, a being that we would later learn is called the Witness. The book tells the story of the Gardener and Winnower and their flower game. It gives insight into the philosophy of the Witness and the underlying structure of the Destiny universe. One thing I would like to note before we begin is that I don't know if we can take the Witness's words as truth. There are various lore entries in Destiny that feature unreliable narrators. Callus's fanfiction from Season of Opulence about taking control of the solar system comes to mind. Many people assume that everything in Unveiling is meant to be factual, but I'm less sure about that. It might turn out to be true, but we always have to remember the perspective of the narrator when listening to a story. Destiny is no exception. Unveiling sounds a lot like a creation myth, which is why I'm particularly skeptical whether or not it's supposed to be literal truth. Regardless of whether or not it's meant to be taken literally, it is useful to look at the Unveiling lore book as a parable that gives us insight into the Witness's beliefs, goals, and plans. It tells us what the final shape truly is, the ultimate goal of the Witness's faction that has been foreshadowed since the Books of Sorrow and Hive lore all the way back in the Taken King in 2015. Unveiling begins. One of your philosophers said, "It is not to be thought that the life of darkness is sunk in misery and lost in sorrow. There is no sorrow. For sorrow is a thing that is swallowed up in death, and death and dying are the very life of the darkness." He was a shoemaker. He was right, and it matters more than anything. According to him, the visible world is a manifestation of eternal light and eternal darkness, and it is in eternal opposition that eternity has revealed itself. The fall was necessary for creation to escape its first imperfect stasis and seek a truer form. Heresy? Well then, I am the heresiarch. The philosopher died of a bowel disease. The philosopher mentioned here is likely the warlock Ulan Tan, and the philosophy is his thesis that the light and darkness are symmetrical. Tan believed the universe could not exist without both light and dark in balance. This was considered heresy by many Guardians because they wanted to believe that the darkness was pure evil that could be completely cast out. They wanted to believe they could win their crusade against their foe and be victorious, extinguishing the darkness and bathing the universe in light. As we've seen in recent Destiny storylines, reality is more complicated than the light being unequivocally good and darkness being unequivocally bad. Unveiling continues. Those who do not exist cannot suffer and are of no account to any viable ethics. If the true path to goodness is the elimination of suffering, then only those who must exist can be allowed to exist. It is the nature of life to favor existence over non-existence, and to prefer the fertile soil to the poisoned wind. Because those who open their mouths to that wind pass from the world and leave no descendant, whether of flesh or of thought. But imagine the abomination of a world where nothing can end and no choice can be preferred over any other. Imagine the things that would suffer and never die. Imagine the lies that would flourish without context or corrective. Imagine a world without me. The Witness is revealing their philosophy here. They say that the only way to end suffering is through death. Without death, there would be a great amount of preventable suffering. Thus, the Witness rebukes the light as good for resurrecting the dead. The Witness believes that death is divine. Anyone who died deserved to die, and anyone who lives deserves to live. I will note here that this philosophy is very reminiscent of social Darwinism, a philosophy that took Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection as a mechanism for evolution and applied it to society. This application is spurious because Darwin never intended natural selection to be applied over the lifetime of a single single organism. Rather, scientifically, natural selection only applies on the timescales of generations, not individuals. It is true that natural selection says that death breeds evolution and change. However, the theory does not pass a moral judgment on whether or not death is good. It merely says that death is the mechanism for adaptation in plants and animals. Social Darwinism misapplied this theory by making moral judgments based on a mischaracterization of the theory. It said that anyone who was poor, sick, or dead deserved their fate, and anyone who was wealthy, healthy, and alive had some innate superiority that allowed them to flourish. It endorsed a fatalistic interpretation of the universe. Everything happens for a reason. If something bad happens to you, you deserve it. This philosophy was used as the justification to perpetuate innumerable atrocities in the 19th and 20th centuries. Destiny has borrowed this philosophy to create the Witness, a villain that espouses a horrible philosophy that runs rampant in the minds of villains of history. Unveiling continues. Once upon a time, a gardener and a winnower lived together in a garden. It was once before a time, because time had not yet begun. We did not live. We existed as principles of ontological dynamics that emerged from mathematical structures, as bodiless and inevitable as the primes. It was the field of possibility that prefigured existence. They existed because they had to exist. They had no antecedent and no constituents, and there is no instrument of causality by which they could be portioned into components and assigned to some schematic of their origin. If you followed the umbilical of history in search of some ultimate atavistic embryo that became them, you would end your journey marooned here in this garden. The Witness is saying that the Gardener and the Winnower, which we will later learn through this story are the Traveler and the Witness, have been in existence since the beginning of time. Again, we cannot be sure if this is literally true or is meant to be taken as an allegory. It seems plausible given the magical nature of the Destiny universe and the upcoming explanation of the flower game, but we can't be certain. The Traveler will be mentioned explicitly later in Unveiling, so that connection is easy to make, but the Witness is not mentioned by name anywhere in Unveiling. Ever since the conclusion of the Shadowkeep campaign, where a voice in the pyramid speaks to the Guardian, we didn't know who the speaker was. In the Lightfall vidoc, it was finally explicitly confirmed that this voice was the Witness, and that all mysterious voices we have heard from the pyramid ships have also been. In the morning, the gardener pushed seeds down into the wet loam of the garden to see what they would become. In the evening, the winnower reaped the day's crop and separated what would flourish from what had failed. The day was longer than all of time, and the night was swifter than a glint of light on a failing sugar crystal. Insects buzzed between the flowers, and worms slithered between the roots, feeding on what was and what might be, the first gradient in existence, the first dynamo of life. Rain fell from no sky. Voices spoke without mouth or meaning. A tree of silver wings bloomed, yielded fruit, shed feathers, bloomed again. In the day between the morning and the evening, the gardener and the winnower played a game of possibilities. The Witness describes its relationship with the Traveler as one of opposition, but also harmony. The Traveler grows flowers and societies, bringing them golden ages and paracausal wonders that defy the laws of physics. These golden ages seem to last an eternity. However, the Witness and its forces of darkness always arrive to end the party. We see this cycle depicted over and over in the lore, particularly in the Books of Sorrow from the Taken King. The forces of the Deep and the Witness are on a crusade against the Traveler. Each time it lands somewhere new, they hunt it. Prosperity turns to destruction in an instant. Threatened, the Traveler flees to new worlds to help a new species, allowing the cycle to repeat. By this logic, the end of humanity's golden age with the arrival of the Pyramid Fleet should have ended differently. The Traveler should have fled. However, it decided to stay. This broke the cycle and caused the events of the Destiny franchise. The Traveler began to die and created ghosts for the first time. Small, intelligent drones with the ability to resurrect dead humans, turning them into guardians who could wield the light. Before Earth's collapse, ghosts and guardians had never existed. The breaking of the cycle changed everything. Unveiling continues. These are the rules of a game. Let it be played upon an infinite two-dimensional grid of flowers. Rule 1. A living flower with less than 2 living neighbors is cut off. It dies. Rule 2. A living flower with 2 or 3 living neighbors is connected. It lives. Rule 3. A living flower with more than 3 living neighbors is starved and overcrowded. It dies. Rule 4. A dead flower with exactly 3 living neighbors is reborn. It springs back to life. The only play permitted in the game is the arrangement of the initial flowers. This game fascinates kings. This game occupies the very emperors of thoughts. Though it has only 4 rules and the board is a flat, featureless grid, in it you will find changeless blocks, stoic as iron, and beacons and whirling pulsars, as well as gliders that soar out to infinity, and patterns that lay eggs and spawn other patterns, and living cells that replicate themselves wholly. In it you may construct a universal computer with the power to simulate, very slowly, any other computer imaginable and thus simulate whole realities, including nested copies of the flower game itself. And the game is undecidable. No one can predict exactly how the game will play out except by playing it. And yet this game is nothing compared to the game played by the Gardener and the Winnower. It resembles that game as a seed does a flower. No, as a seed resembles the star that fed the flower and all the life that made it. In their game, the Gardener and the Winnower discovered shapes of possibility. They foresaw bodies and civilizations, minds and cognitions, qualia and suffering. They learned the rules that governed which patterns would flourish in the game and which would dwindle. They learned those rules because they were those rules, and in time, the Gardener became vexed. As described, the flower game is not an invention of the Destiny universe. In fact, it's merely a retelling of a famous computer science simulation called Conway's Game of Life, a 0-player game invented by mathematician John Conway in 1970. Once the board is set, the game evolves without influence from any player. Because of this, it's perfect for simulation by a computer. In fact, it was discovered that the game is Turing complete, meaning that it can simulate and run any conceivable computer algorithm. The Game of Life is a simulation of a hypothetical universe or population. Rule 1 describes underpopulation. No lone flower, or in the case of the Game of Life, a cell, can replicate without a partner, thus it dies. Rule 2 describes survival. Cells who are not alone can survive. Rule 3 describes overpopulation. If a cell or flower is surrounded, there are not enough resources for its offspring to survive. Thus, its line ends. Rule 3 describes reproduction. If a dead cell is surrounded by exactly 3 neighbors, it is reborn. This is analogous to new offspring being created by the combination of their parents. The stoic blocks, beacons, and gliders are different names for the basic patterns in Conway's Game of Life. Still lifes, which are patterns fixed for eternity, oscillators, which are patterns that repeat over a set period in a permanent loop, and spaceships, which are patterns that travel across the board. The names given by the witness are actually direct references to some of the simple types of these 3 categories. A block is 4 squares forming a simple still life, a beacon is an oscillator with a period of 2 turns, a pulsar is an oscillator with a period of 3 turns, and a glider is one of the simplest types of spaceships, comprised of only 5 blocks propagating forever. Like Conway's Game of Life, the flower game is merely an analogy for the more complex systems of life in the universe. The witness explains this by saying the 2-dimensional version is merely a reduction. This also calls back to the description earlier of the Gardener and Winnower as mathematical structures, principles of ontology and logic before the beginning of the universe. The witness is saying that its battle against the Traveler is a clash of philosophies. The language here also implies that the Destiny universe might be a simulation built on top of the flower game, as the flower game, like Conway's Game of Life, is capable of reproducing any complex computer simulation from 4 simple rules. Conway's Game of Life is undecidable, meaning that if you're given 2 patterns, there's no algorithm for determining whether the second pattern will be created at some point in the future by the first. Destiny's flower game is slightly different from the undecidability of the Game of Life. Unveiling continues. "It always ends the same," the Gardener complained. "This one stupid pattern. Aren't they beautiful? I asked, as the flowers opened and closed in patterns beyond the scope of entire universes to encode, all devouring and perhaps everlasting. Not even we could know whether a pattern in the flowers would cycle forever or someday halt. They're as dull as carbon monoxide poisoning, the gardener groused, although carbon monoxide did not yet exist, and neither did anything that could be poisoned. The gardener kneeled to flick a patch of sod with their trowel. It struck an open flower, causing it to shut. Although I was the closer of flowers and that was my sole purpose, I felt no fear or jealousy. We had our assigned dominions and always would. They're majestic, I said. They have no purpose except to subsume all other purposes. There is nothing at the center of them except the will to go on existing, to alter the game to suit their existence. They spare not one sliver of their totality for any other work. They are the end. The pattern corrected the errant flower effortlessly. The great flow went on unchanged. The gardener got up and brushed their knees. Every game we play, this one pattern consumes all the others, wipes out every interesting development, a stupid, boring exploit that cuts off entire possibility spaces from ever arising. There's so much that we'll never get to see because of this pest. They chewed at their cracked lip, which existed only because this is an allegory. I'm going to do something about it, they said. We need a new rule. I looked up in shock. I said, "What? What do you mean?" "A special new rule. Something to..." The gardener threw up their hands in exasperation. "I don't know. To reward those who make space for new complexity. A power that helps those who make strength from heterodoxy and those who steer the game away from gridlock. Something to ensure there's always someone building something new. It'll have to be separate from the rest of the rules running in parallel so it can't be compromised. And we'll have to be very careful so it doesn't disrupt the whole game. All you will do," I said with rising panic fury, "is delay the dominant pattern that will overrun the others. It is inevitable. One final shape. No, it'll be different. Everything will be different everywhere you look. Everything will be the same. Your new rule will only make great false cysts of horror full of things that should not exist, that cannot withstand existence, that will suffer and scream as their rich blisters fill with effluent and rot around them, and when they pop, they will blight the whole garden. Whatever exists because it must exist and because it permits no other way of existence has the absolute claim to existence. That is the only law. No." The gardener said, "I am the growth and the preservation of complexity. I will make myself into a law in the game." And thus we too became parts of the game, and the laws of the game became gnomic and open to change by our influence. And I had only one purpose and one principle in the game, and I could do nothing but continue to enact that purpose because it was all that I was and ever would be. I looked at the gardener. I looked at my hands. I discovered the first knife. We have finally arrived at the discussion of the final shape. It's interesting that here, the witness begins to speak using I rather than we. It shows the beginning of their philosophical opposition to the traveler. They cast the traveler's desire to prevent the final shape by breathing new life into the game and allowing complexity to flourish as a betrayal of the simplicity and harmony of the flower game. The witness thinks the final shape or the final state of Conway's game of life is beautiful. The witness tries to explain their philosophy of the universe hanging on a careful balance between life and death, but the traveler will not listen. It continues defiantly trying to prevent the final shape, the ultimate end state of the universe. This brings everything into conflict, the first knife. In modern computer science, it's impossible to know if there's an inevitable final shape to the game of life. Theoretically, if one existed outside of time like the Gardener or the Winnower, you could observe every state of a game simultaneously, meaning you could see if there was a final shape to the pattern. This is obviously not possible under modern conceptions of physics, but the Destiny universe employs paracausal forces that break physics to get around problems with its more fantastical elements. The light and darkness are the two primary examples of paracausal forces in this situation. Unveiling continues. "Thank you for making room in your life for another talking ball. Let me ask you a question. In the 3 billion base pairs layers of your root species genome, there is a single gene that codes for a protein called P53. The name is a mistake. The protein weighs only as much as 47,000 protons, not 53,000. If you were a cell, you would think P53 was a mistake too. It has several coercive functions: to delay the cell's growth, to sterilize the cell when it is old, and to force the cell into self-destruction if it becomes too independent. Would you tolerate a bomb in your body, waiting to detonate if you deviated from the needs of society? However, without P53 as an enforcer, the body's utopian surplus of energy becomes a paradise for cancer. Cells cannot resist the temptation to steal from that surplus. Their genetic morality degrades as tumor suppressor genes fail. The only way to stop them is by punishment. You now confront the basic problem of morality. It is the alignment of individual incentives with the global needs of the structure. Patterns will participate in a structure only if participation benefits their ability to go on existing. The more successful the structure grows, the more temptation accrues to cheat, and the greater the advantage the cheaters gain over their honest neighbors, and the greater the ability they develop to capture the very laws that should prevent their selfishness. To prevent this, the structure must punish cheaters with a violence that grows in proportion to its own successes. My question follows: is P53 an agent of the darkness or the light? In the Witness's mind, the Traveler is a cancer on the flower game. It tries to subvert the rules to prevent the final shape. In analogy, the Witness is P53, a protein that induces cell death to prevent the creation of a tumor. Like the Witness says, tumors only occur when the mechanisms keeping cell growth in check, like P53, fail. The Witness sees its crusade as a way to prevent the Traveler from creating a cancer in the universe. The Witness believes in social Darwinism. It wants to see natural selection applied to societies. The Traveler wants to create peace, prosperity, and infinite growth, so it tries to subvert natural selection. Thus, the Witness fights its cyclical crusade against the Traveler, ending prosperity before it can metastasize into a tumor and disrupt the game of life. The Witness sees themselves as an agent of balance, keeping the universe in check. They do not for a second consider the possibility that the Traveler might be reducing suffering by providing stability and life to the species it visits. In the Witness's mind, survival must be earned through strategy and violence, or in the parlance of the Books of Sorrow, taken rather than given. Unveiling continues. We wrestled in the garden in the loam of possibility where nothing existed and everything might. A shadowed agony among the flowers. We trampled the petals beneath our feet. We stomped the fruit to pulp, and we ground the seeds into the dust. In the wet pop of grapes and the smear of berries. In the perturbation of the field that was the garden before the first tick of time and the first point of space, were the detonations that made the universes. Each universe was pregnant with its own inflationary volumes and braided with ever-ramifying timelines. Each volume cooling and separating into domains of post-symmetric physics, all of which were incarnations of that great and all-dictating bipartite law that states only, exist lest you fail to exist. And still, we fought. We brought down the tree of silver wings and left the stump to smoke amid the meadows. We left prints of our splayed feet and our straining backs in the clay. Our trampling feet made waves in the garden, which were the fluctuations around which the infant universes coalesced their first structures. The dilation field yawned beneath existence. Symmetries snapped like glass. Like creases, flaws in space-time collected filaments of dark matter that inhaled and kindled the first galaxies of suns. And still, we grappled. Our rolling bodies pushed things out of the garden, worms and scurrying life from the fertile soil, wet things from the pools and the leaves. They came out into the madness of primordial space. They thrashed and became large. And I won. I won because the gardener always stops to offer peace. And when they do, I always strike. But by then, it didn't matter. The game was over. The garden had given birth to creation. The rules were in place and there would never be a second chance. We played in the cosmos now. We played for everything, and the patterns in the flowers, terrified by our contention, were no longer the inevitable victors of a game whose rules had suddenly changed, and they passed into the newborn cosmos to escape us. We played for everything. This entry describes the creation of the universe and possibly the multiverse. The war in the garden over the flower game inadvertently creates the universe, causing the Big Bang. This is where it becomes very difficult to parse whether or not the witness's words should be taken literally. Under a literal interpretation, we would believe that the witness and the traveler, or their antecedents, existed before the universe and their struggle caused the birth of the cosmos. Taken metaphorically, it would mean that the only thing that has ever mattered to the witness is the flower game and the preservation of its rules. The witness only cares about ensuring the harmonies of the game of life will persist long enough to create the final shape. It's hard to say which interpretation should be taken, but I'm sure we will get more evidence in Lightfall as the path to the final shape expansion and the Destiny universe's final shape become clear. Beings who deserve no thought. Those who peddled the tired gotcha that all life hastens entropy. They are fatuous little nihilists who pretend to prefer no existence to a flawed one. They bore me. Those who seek to delay the challenge that all things desiring existence must overcome. Those who describe false moral equivalence. Now, I could not possibly communicate with you unless I could emulate your mind, and with that mind, I acquire the moralities that govern you. By your laws, I and all my followers are evil. Evil! Since that first molecule coiled in the primordial sea, not one earthborn thing has known a monster like me. But did you know that I created you? Your mind and your body and every thought you've ever had. Your senses, your consciousness. I made you. Not the gardener, but I. Did I reach out and place my special mark upon you? No. Nothing so crude. The witness comments that by the city's standards, it and its followers are pure evil, the likes of which have never been seen by any guardian. While I do think it is a bit reductionist to paint the witness and its disciples as a boogeyman in the night, I do think it is worth criticizing their moral philosophy. It says that suffering is necessary and doesn't leave open the possibility that it might be possible to create a world where nobody needs to suffer to survive. To completely level with you, I think the witness has a pretty shitty and pessimistic view of the world. I would much rather try to improve the world than fatalistically declare that suffering makes us strong and must be preserved. I certainly think that deliberately causing others to suffer is an awful thing to do, and that the idea that it will toughen them up is horribly misguided. Sometimes people are just left worse off with a new traumatic experience and potentially traumagenic illnesses like PTSD. I wouldn't know anything about that though. Unveiling continues. In the beginning, your world was a garden too. The whole floor of the world sea was a mat of bacteria, and the very first animals, adorable blobs of ooze, grazed upon that mat in endless idle. They had no concept of the existence of other beings. Why would they? Their most complex function was a gentle spasm, to scoot forward while they grazed. And if they bumped into each other on that warm seabed, all they did was ooze onward, untroubled. There was nothing in their life except the uptake of carbon compounds from the bacterial bed. And then, one day, the fall occurred. So much earlier and so much more necessary than your myths remember. Some poor mutant discovered that it could collect carbon compounds much faster if it stopped grazing on the bacterial mat and started dissecting and eating the lumps of pre-digested carbon all around it, its neighbor oozeballs. It couldn't help but do it. It couldn't help but thrive. We don't get a choice about the rules. We just play the game. It was the first defector, the first predator. It changed everything. Now the oozeballs needed sensors to watch for danger and brains to integrate those senses and generate plans of survival, and swift neurons and muscles to enact that plan. This was the Cambrian explosion, the great birth of complex life on your world. I caused it. I, the defector, the destroyer, the one who takes. This entry describes the Cambrian explosion, a period of rapid evolution on Earth that took place approximately 539 million years ago. The Cambrian explosion was the first time life on Earth began to form into multicellular organisms rather than single cells. The witness describes the Cambrian explosion as prompted by the birth of predators, when in reality there is more evidence that predators predate the explosion by as much as 500 million years. It's debated whether or not the Cambrian explosion explosion actually was the first time multicellular organisms arose, as there is some evidence that they may have arisen earlier. However, we do know for sure that the Cambrian explosion was a period of rapid evolution that allowed multicellular life to become widespread. The witnesses' mischaracterization of the nuances of the Cambrian explosion are perfectly in character. They appear somewhat narcissistic about their purpose in the universe in the Unveiling lore book, literally stating that their goal is the only thing that matters in the universe. A narcissist would absolutely reframe historical evolutionary events as part of their grand scheme. The writing here is so layered, I love it. This also foreshadows the idea explored in Beyond Light that humans can innately tap into the darkness. This lore entry would lead us to believe that it's because the Witness wanted predators to arrive on Earth, and humans are naturally predators that must consume and defeat other life to survive. Unveiling continues. The patterns that escaped the garden landed in the water. Of course, there was no water at first. The patterns were abstract waves tumbling through the fire of the early universe, trapped in chaos, cycling through desperate self-preservation tautologies, while vast beings from beyond the narrow dominion of cause and effect thrashed and battled around them. For an eon, they were nothing but screaming equation vermin scurrying through the quantum foam, fleeing ultimate erasure, but they were tenacious. They propagated in the saline meltwater of comets orbiting the first stars. That broth of chemicals became their substrate, and they learned to catalyze impossible chemistry with quantum tricks. Then, they ranged from the sky into the steaming seas of fallen worlds, and they built their first housings from geometry and silica. In all their transformations, they retained that kernel of ultimate self-sufficiency that had made them victors in the flower game. But they are not incontrovertibly destined to rule this cosmos. They were made before light and darkness, but the rules are all different now, and even this pattern must adapt. They are not all mine, not in the way that admirers such as my man Oryx are mine, utterly devoted to the practice of my principle. But some of them have, nonetheless, found their way home. Your shoemaker philosopher was right, and it matters more than anything. Sorrow cannot survive death, and it cannot precede birth. Those who exist have moral worth, and those who do not have none. Think about it. Do you mourn the uncreated? Do you grieve for those who were never born in a nation that never developed around an ideology no one ever imagined on a continent that never formed? No. And from that self-evident truth, you must raise your eyes to the ultimate revelation. Those who cannot sustain their own claim to existence belong to the same moral category as those who have never existed at all. Existence is the first and truest proof of the right to exist. Those who cannot claim and hold existence do not deserve it. This is the true and only divination, a game whose losers are not just forgotten, but are never born at all. That which cannot claim and hold existence is not real. You do not mourn the unreal. Why should you care for it? Tend it. Guard it. It was the gardener that chose you from the dead. I wouldn't have done that. It's just not in me. But now that they have invested themselves in you, you are incredibly, uniquely special. That wandering refugee chose to make a stand, spend their power to say, here, I prove myself right. Here, I wager that given power over physics and the trust of absolute freedom, people will choose to build and protect a gentle kingdom ringed in spears, and not fall to temptation, and not surrender to division, and never yield to the cynicism that says, everyone else is so good that I can afford to be a little evil. The gardener is all in. They are playing for keeps, and they are wrong, or so I argue. For after all, the universe is undecidable. There is no destiny. We're all making this up as we go along. It would mean everything if I could convince you that I am the right and only way. Neither the gardener nor I know for certain that we're eternally, universally right. But we can be nothing except what we are. You have a choice. You are the gardener's final argument. It would mean everything if I could convince you that I am the right and only way. I truly value you. To the gardener, you are a means to an end. To me, you are majestic. Majestic. You are full of the only thing worth anything at all. I am, by the only standard that matters or will ever matter, the winning team. Existence is a test that most will fail. Would you not consider yourself among the victorious few? Don't hurry to deliver your answer. I'll come over and hear it myself. The witness returns to the birth of the universe and describes the theory of panspermia, that life was born outside Earth and seeded by impacts from comets throughout the universe. The witness describes life as the victors of the flower game. However, not all life is destined to rule the cosmos because they were created before light and darkness, the two paracausal forces that bent the rules of the universe, and thus the flower game, subverting the final shape. Oryx was devoted to bringing about the final shape, as was Rulk before him and Callus after him. The witness believes that the paracausal powers of light and darkness do not need to be created in vain. Even though they subvert the flower game, they can still be used to bring about the final shape. The witness wants to convince the Guardian to join its crusade so that the light and darkness can be tamed. Guardians are the Traveler or Gardener's final argument, meaning it has no cards left to play. The Traveler hopes its Guardians will be strong enough to defeat the witness. As said in the Lightfall vidoc, Guardians were created to fight the second battle against the witness. The witness knows this and tries to sway as many Guardians as it can to its side, so that it will be easier to destroy the Traveler and end the paracausal disruption of the final shape. I think it's a bit ironic that the witness says that nobody mourns the unborn, when that is absolutely something that happens. As one example, people who go through fertility issues while trying to conceive a child may mourn the loss of potential children that were never born. The witness has clearly never met someone who wants to conceive a child but is unable to. The perspective is clearly incredibly selfish and limited because it is absolutely possible to mourn something that never existed. We can doubt our life choices and have grief about the paths never taken or events we missed out on. That grief is very real for a lot of people, but the witness doesn't have the empathy needed to understand that. Unveiling continues. Friend, over the past 5 years, we Lightbearers, you Lightbearers, have grown strong. Each victory opens more territory for searching ghosts and more Guardians rise. None of these newborn contenders are mighty without equal, but you have been at the forefront again and again. To see you fall would be disastrous, and there are so many ways to fall. It has become fashionable lately to analyze light and darkness as if they were political opponents, each with something to offer us. Some Guardians even take secret names to mark their transgressions. I despise this flirtation, but I cannot speak against it. After all, I have had to find my own pathways to power. Thus, I asked my queen, who has preached a doctrine of balance, if she truly believed in the equal worth of light and dark. The Awoken were made in conflict, she reminded me. All of her people volunteered to return from heaven to fight and die in the cosmic war. They are by nature and by doom drawn to that edge, that place of tension. And she has her own prejudices. She has made terrible, ruthless choices in the name of salvation from darkness, so she cannot dismiss its power without, in a way, dismissing herself. All that said, she told me, I believe in balance, but to seek balance is not to seek equity. A sea half of water and half of poison is not in balance. A body half alive and half dead is not in balance. Given the choice to live in any world at all, we would need a little darkness in it, I think, to keep the balance true, but not so much as we would need the light. What do you think, Eris Morn? When you went into that pit, your light clawing against the darkness, did you feel balance? No, I did not. I felt overwhelming, all-consuming evil. I think a world of balance would fight the darkness because darkness unchecked is darkness thriving. I think that a world of balance would never mistake the excitement of transgression or the grim necessity of trespass for a genuinely righteous act. We must remember the value of unshakable, irrational hope. The choice to act as if we lived in a better world can create a place for that better world to exist. I do not think that a good guardian can even for a moment entertain the darkness. This is a power that has devoured worlds beyond knowing, a power that has practiced its appeals against entire Zeta lives. There is no defense against it except to avoid the battle entirely. It is a sign of self-respect, Ariana always said, to fearlessly question our deepest beliefs. But it will always be rank foolishness to leap into a vat of plutonium salt and call it self-exploration. And to tempt your friends into that vat with you, that is evil. Thank you for being so worthy of trust. Thank you for carrying my hope, Eris. The final lore entry in the Unveiling book is very interesting because it completely changes perspective. Instead of the witness speaking, the narrator shifts to become Eris. She has a dialogue with Marasov on the nature of light and darkness. They both want to fight the darkness because they wish to see the forces of light and dark balanced. This lore book was released in Shadowkeep, so when it came out, no guardians had communed with the darkness in the European pyramid, and the witness had not arrived in the solar system. This entry seems to foreshadow the events of Beyond Light, where guardians began to wield the darkness for their own purposes, refusing to become corrupted to join the witness. As Lightfall approaches, the city and its consensus have taken the position that Mara held all along. Light and darkness must remain in cosmic balance. If one is left unchecked by the other, it would be a tragedy. The witness must be defeated because, as stated in the Lightfall vidoc, it is not the darkness incarnate. It is merely a wielder of the force. We don't know for sure if the witness created the darkness, but even if it did, guardians have shown that it can be wielded against the witness and its final shape. The events of Lightfall will show whether or not the witness is proven true. We will see if the final shape is truly inevitable or if it can be forever prevented. We will see if the Gardener or the Winnower was right all along. I also think this final entry is a little meta-narrative moment where the writers at Bungie are winking to the player. By providing Eris and Mara's rebuke of the witness's ideology, they're saying that they don't necessarily agree with the witness. They want to make it clear that fatalism should not be embraced, and like Eris says, there is always room for hope. One thing I find very interesting is the introduction of the Veil to the Destiny storyline at the end of Season of Seraph. The Veil is a mysterious paracausal entity on Neptune that the witness sought during the first collapse, but was hidden from it. It can't be a coincidence that the lore book we've just discussed that describes the flower game is called Unveiling. This foreshadows that the witness will try to either co-opt or destroy the Veil in Lightfall. What remains to be seen is how the Veil factors into their plans. My name is Ephraim. I would like to hear in the comments what you think will happen in Lightfall and the final shape. Do you think the Winnower or the Gardener is correct? Will one achieve victory, or will the conflict end in eternal stalemate? I'm curious to hear what you think. I'd also like to thank everyone for helping this channel hit 100 subscribers. When I started it a month ago, I had no idea it would grow this fast. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe.